Perhaps the first example of what could be called a newspaper was the acta diurna, roughly, daily news, that Julius Caesar introduced in 59 BC. This was a handwritten news sheet posted daily in the Forum at Rome and in other common meeting places around the city. Of course, a lot of the news would be out of date in the sense that, for example, it took a long time for reports of a victory in a distant country to get back to Rome. Nonetheless, a lot of the items included are similar to those found in more modern newspapers: news of battles, as already mentioned, as well as political and military appointments, political events, and even a social diary recording marriages, births, and deaths. One mustn't forget sport, if that is what you'd call it. Just like modern fans of football, sports-minded Romans could keep up with the latest results of the gladiator contests. People who lived in the provinces and wanted to be kept up to date would send scribes to Rome to copy the news and have them send it back by letter. Many of these scribes could make extra money by providing the news to more than one client. Quite a few of them were slaves and would go on to use the extra money earned to buy their freedom. As you have probably noticed, fashions and tastes change quite noticeably over the years, most obviously perhaps in clothes, hairstyles, and popular music. The reputations of writers and artists are no different, though the alternating periods of being in and then out of fashion are longer. A poet may no longer appeal to a large reading public for a number of reasons, though we must keep in mind that poetry is a minority taste and its readership is relatively small in the first place. So, I want to look at the reputation of Alexander Pope. In his own lifetime, he was praised and idolized by both his friends and the literary world in general, though he did have some rather vicious enemies. Yet both friends and enemies seemed more concerned with either praising or attacking his character and morals than with properly assessing the poems themselves. The Romantics, of course, had little time for him. Indeed, the Romantic movement, in poetry at least, was an attempt to make a complete break with the strict formality and rationality of the Augustan poets, of whom Pope was the most notable example. They did not regard him as a real poet and complained of his ignorance of nature in the sense of mountains, trees, and flowers. The idea that a dog could seek help from a human does have a solid basis in science. In what's known as the unsolvable task experiment, a dog first learns how to open a puzzle box with a tasty treat inside. The puzzle is then secretly switched for another that's impossible to solve. After becoming frustrated, dogs shift their attention away from the puzzle and onto a nearby human and then back to the puzzle. The dog attempts to shift the human's attention to the puzzle as a request for help. Human infants do the same thing. Such efforts are called referential communication. So if dogs behave this way, you might expect the same from their close relatives, wolves. But when researchers tested wolves raised by humans, the animals just kept trying to solve the puzzle, never seeking help. Since the dogs and wolves were all raised the same way and by the same people, domestication must be responsible for the behavior. Green chemistry is a concept designed to develop technologies which allow chemistry to be practiced with minimal damage to the environment or in an environmentally compatible way. And it's meant to cover both chemical processes and chemical products. The center, if you would, set up about 7 or 8 years ago, and the idea was to provide a hub of activities that covered fundamental research work, industrial collaboration, but also educational developments. So we work with schools and on public projects as well, and also networking. So we network out to well over 1,000 people around the globe. The thing that makes it difficult is because even if life had evolved on Mars, the chances of being preserved are very small. If we use Earth as a reference, and our planet is teeming with life, yet it rarely preserves evidence of life of the fossil record. And the focus now is on exploring for habitable environments. If you're looking for water, a source of energy, either solar energy or thermal energy or chemical energy, and then organic carbon, assuming life as we know it on Earth based on carbon. So those are sort of the 3 things that we're looking for in the course of our mission. Belief is the human capacity to imagine, to be creative, to hope and dream, to infuse the world with meanings, and to cast our aspirations far and wide. Limited neither by personal experience nor material reality. Believing is a commitment, an investment, a devotion to possibilities. Beliefs permeate neurobiologies, bodies and ecologies acting as dynamic agents in evolutionary processes. The human capacity for belief, the specifics of belief, and our diverse belief systems shape, structure and alter our daily lives, our societies, and the world around us. How did I get into anthropology? Well, I'm not an anthropologist, not trained in it anyway. In fact, I'm a marine biologist, and it's more that I'm interested in the strandlopers, the beach walkers, if you like, than in anthropology generally. In fact, it was through my early interest in all things to do with the sea that I first heard of them. As a kid, my favorite pastime was getting down to the beach and mucking about in rock pools and collecting anything the sea tossed up, and, the strandlopers lived off the sea and seashore gathering food such as mussels, oysters, crabs, and so on, just as I did. So when I heard of them I thought, right, this is my kind of thing, and I felt a kind of, well, affinity for them. At first people thought they were a myth, I suppose because there didn't seem to be much evidence for their existence, but now we do have archaeological evidence such as pottery, discarded shells, the bones of seals and large fish, and so on. And those shells, we believe, became their first tools, and in some cases were also used as money and jewelry. Of course, before they had the implements, the tools to hunt and fish, everything had to be caught by hand, so they kept mostly to shallow water. Then they might have used a primitive form of fishing line, perhaps the tendril of a climbing plant or a strip of animal skin with a bone or small piece of wood that would stick in the fish's throat. It is not often I get the chance to talk about the psychology of pop music, or rather the lyrics and the effect they have on young people. I must say at the outset that I'm not at all sure about the findings of a recent survey I've been studying, conducted over a period of 30 years. In short, it claims that late adolescents and college students are more narcissistic than ever before. This might well be true. And it might also be true that pop lyrics are becoming more self-absorbed, negative and violent. But this reflects the psychology of the writers and performers more than their listeners. Also, as the writers of the study are alarmed to discover, this radical increase in narcissism comes with higher levels of depression, which, if you think about it for a second, is hardly surprising. Furthermore, they have detected a link with heightened anger and problems maintaining relationships. Now, a couple of points. First, adolescents are pretty much self-absorbed anyway, but it's rarely pathological. Also, you can read almost anything you want into song lyrics from any era. Again, people nowadays find it easier to express themselves emotionally than their counterparts did 30 years ago. Last, the survey suggests a complete personality change over the covered, yet I doubt that personality traits can change so much from one generation to another or, for that matter, from one culture to another. How much the Earth's climate will change in the future depends, among other things, on how quickly and to what extent the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere increases. If we take no action to limit future greenhouse gas emissions, it is estimated that there will be a rise in temperature of 0.2 to 0.3 degrees Celsius every 10 years. This is a far greater rate of warming than anything that has occurred over the past 10,000 years. One set of predictions claims that some regions of the world will warm more quickly than others, and rainfall will also increase in some areas and decrease in others. These changes will affect the sea level, which could rise by 50 centimeters over the next century. All this will affect humans through the effects it has on water resources.
The impact on young Australians who are interested in buying a home of their own has been very significant. Australia's housing affordability now shapes the typical housing cycle or housing career, as some people call it. Most Australians in the normal course of events are people who move through the housing cycle in a way that matches the stages of life that they're at. So, they move out of the family home in their late teens or early 20s as they gain their independence from their families, then they rent to save for a home they can afford as either a group or maybe a couple. And maybe they can upgrade it when they have a family in their middle age. They are more than likely to have paid off their mortgage. And that means they have housing security in their old age. That's no longer the typical housing cycle for Australians. Young people generally live at home for much longer than they once did. They generally rent for longer and they're more likely to be saddled with a mortgage not just into their middle age but more often than not into their retirement as well. In fact, in 2006, 65,000 retiree households were still paying off the mortgage. Affordable rent is also an elusive right around Australia. We have very low rental vacancies, we see high turnover as landlords want to maximize their profits in a tight market, and we see less long-term or lifelong rental, as we see in other countries and other economies. At the top, you would have a king. Now the king would rule over a kingdom. Now, this is not so easy to govern, especially during the Middle Ages. And the king might owe many people, things, especially people who helped the king come to power, helped him dispose of the previous king or to conquer this land. And so in exchange for that and to help govern, he might grant land or feasts to other people. And the key currency in the Middle Ages under the feudal system, island. And land in exchange for loyalty and service. So this whole thing is a kingdom. Now right over here, this is a duchy. And a duchy will be controlled by a duke. I guess I didn't call it duchy because that just doesn't sound as serious. So the king might grant a duchy to a duke, and in exchange, the duke would provide loyalty, pledge their fealty. If the kingdom is threatened, the duke will fight alongside. The king would provide their own troops if the king wants to go conquer other territories, same thing, and also provide the king with taxes, which might be in the form of coinage depending on what time and region we are in the Middle Ages, or it might be in the form of a percentage of the agricultural production from this duchy. Remember two things. First, I want you to try and remember learning how to ride a bike. Maybe you have a scar you received when you flipped over the handlebars. The next thing I want you to remember is how to ride a bike. The reason I asked you to recall both of these memories is that they belong to two different designated realms of memory. Memory is a fluid and dynamic system that is exceedingly complicated. To this end, psychologists have attempted to divide memory up to make it easier to study. There are two main categories. Explicit memory is a memory that can be intentionally and consciously recalled. This is your memory of riding a bike and falling over the handlebars and skinning your knee.
Convincing evidence to support this theory is hard to obtain. Daily practice can build confidence and improve skills. Coursework and exams will form part of the annual assessment. Create a playlist of your favorite music to help you relax in difficult situations.